Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Welcome to the Universalist Church of West Hartford online, in which love is the spirit. Oh, we've had a... Okay. It brings me great joy to see you all this morning, whether you're in West Hartford, Connecticut, or anywhere in the world. I'm Gretchen, and I'm one of your board representatives. So we have Zoom fellowship times for our community throughout the week, as well as before and after Sunday's worship. You can find out more information about those gatherings by getting onto our mailing list through the contact page on our website. Please be sure to read our electronic communications. They're the best way that we can stay connected to each other. Today, we'll have our Zoom fellowship at about 10:45, right after worship ends. If you're attending through Zoom today, please stay online, even if you need to take a short break. Come back and join us in conversations with one another. Online worship is a bit different from being in the sanctuary. You can find the order of service in the chat box, which is, for many people, over to the right of your Zoom screen, or the YouTube description. Now, if you would take a moment to wave hello to one another, and to everyone watching our live stream. And turn off your email and your other apps, put down the cell phone, put the keyboard away, and please settle in for some worship.
eternal happiness, or woe must then my portion be.
Please join me in speaking the words of our affirmation, our covenant. It should be appearing in your description shortly. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Dan Bouchard will offer a time for all ages.
Like lots of boys, the war heroes were the men who inspired me in my childhood. And I've been reflecting upon that this Memorial Day. I remember our public library's VHS collection, which once occupied this big chunk of the wall in the magazine room, which is off the main gallery there. And I'd ride my bike down there and I'd check out every classic war movie I could find, not even recognizing that most of them were anti-war movies. We had plastic army men, we had some toy guns, and those things weren't our only focus, but it seemed like the messages we received then were mostly ones of glory. My grandfather enlisted after his high school graduation, and after boot camp, he was immediately deployed to the Battle of the Bulge. He was heroic to us for lots of reasons, but his service was a big part of his identity. For a long time, I thought that he didn't see a lot of actual combat, but I realized at some point that he just didn't talk about that part. The stories he'd share with me were about wondering over the mobilization that happened and what our young people accomplished, feats of engineering and logistics that are still rarely seen. It was a world event that shaped him. In the early 90s, my mother joined this congregation and my brothers and I the church school. And another veteran made a different kind of impression on us. Stephen Kendrick was the settled minister then, but also present was Wallace Fisk, retired and by then minister emeritus. Wallace Fisk was one of the warmest and kindest people you could ever meet. One day we were surprised when our mom told us that he was a veteran too. In fact, he had served with the American Volunteer Group, better known as the Flying Tigers. Those men were essentially mercenaries, flying and fighting under Chinese colors before the US entered the war. And they were famous for the shark mouths painted on the noses of their aircraft. Talk about guts and glory. But Reverend Fisk wasn't a pilot or a soldier. He was their chaplain. I remember inching toward him one Sunday morning at coffee hour with a book I had about the Tigers. I asked him if he was really there and had he ever met Claire Chenot? He was the larger-than-life leader of that unit. Wallace Fisk said, "I performed his wedding service." We chatted a little. There were more important things to remember about that war than the fighting. Now the world is very different, and I think there's a natural tension between being a Unitarian Universalist with Unitarian Universalist values and the military. It's a tension that leaves me both fiercely anti-war, but also proud of my grandfather's service, and now especially my brother's. My younger brother, Chris, is in active duty right now, safely garrisoned in Colorado. We must actively choose the lessons we wish to carry forward if we want any hope of learning. And even if I was left wanting in my youth for glorious battle tales from the veterans I knew, What I didn't realize then was that they were telling me stories nonetheless. My grandfather spent years of his retirement driving other veterans to the VA hospital and volunteering in other ways. He deeply believed in service, which is what had motivated his enlistment in the first place, I think. As for Reverend Fisk, well, I suspect he was always one of those who helped others focus on the small joys around us and to lift up life and love, even in times of trouble. So have a happy Memorial Day. And if you've ever served or sent a loved one to serve, thank you.
Memorial Day is set in our memories, as Dan pointed out, as a day when we recall all those who have touched our lives by giving their lives to protect each one of us. This celebration of sorts always calls to mind, for me, my neighborhood growing up, where all the military veterans put on their uniforms and wore them to their own denominational churches in honor of their colleagues, who they recalled through words like, "He was in the trenches with me," or "He stood by me in the cold night." Our memories call to us on this day. We can feel a significant touch, or recall a unique smell, or hear a special piece of music, or see a unique parade. When this happens, our loved one is brought into a familiar landscape or a room or a space, and they speak to us anew. Today, as we are called upon to remember, let us not lose sight of one another in this sacred time we are sharing. Let us not let the numbers of deaths cover over the reality of each unique and caring individual each one of those numbers represents on the front pages of our newspapers and in our text messaging. The family that has been affected, the wives, the husbands, the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, the colleagues, our entire communities. May our Memorial Day be a time of recollection, but also a time of renewal, a time when we call forth our ancestors who lived life so that we, each one of us, could live our lives more fully. Within our Fern Street community, we have been asked by Herb to remember his mother, Barbara, who died on Thursday, May 14th. Barbara was known for her generous spirit and her gentle wisdom, charm, and sense of humor. She shared her knowing wink with her family and friends at Whitney Donut often. Joyce also asked that you keep her twin sister and her sister's family in your energy circles this week, as Judy continues to struggle with her cancer diagnosis. We also have been asked to give a note of gratitude to and for Sally, who has returned home from Yale New Haven Hospital. Her daughter Holly is with Sally as she recuperates. In the larger community of which we are a part, let us hold all the families of the Pakistani PIA flight, where all but 2 passengers of the 107 were lost. Amidst the celebration at the close of Ramadan, these families are mourning this unexpected loss. Finally, let us not forget all the members of our human community who have lost their loved ones or who are anguishing over their loved ones in ICU units, or those who are quarantining in place. May our collective community love and energy support them this day and in our week to come. Let us now take moments of silence together to hold these and our own concerns in the bonds of our communal prayer. May our Memorial Day celebrations also hold within them time for each of us to remember those who have touched their lives, our lives, with theirs. May it be so.
We continue to be grateful for all the ways in which you support our congregation and one another in this time. Whether it be phone calls and text messages and Zoom gatherings, coming to support the food pantry and other programs that are still essential, getting groceries for those who need them, checking in on one another, preparing for the day when this pandemic crisis comes to a close. We are thrilled to be able to share this time with one another. And so in this moment, I want to remind you that we also continue to share our general offering through the end of this month with Hawkwing, a nonprofit that works with the Cheyenne River Lakota to alleviate poverty, improve housing, strengthen education, and support health services on the reservation. It also happens to be the poorest county in the United States and has been on the front lines of trying to keep COVID-19 out of its community. Half of what you give on Sunday mornings that is not part of a pledge goes to Hawkwing to support their mission, and half supports the work of our congregation. You can find the links for donating to support our congregation and Hawkwing in the chat box and on our website. We are grateful for your support, both of this community that sustains us and Hawkwing, which helps sustain the Cheyenne River Lakota. Let us join in singing our doxology. Our reading this morning is from an article in The Atlantic by Yasha Mount called "I Predict Your Predictions Are Wrong." When confronted with disaster, believing that everything will change is all too easy. How is it possible to write poems after Auschwitz? To enjoy a Sunday stroll in Lower Manhattan following 9/11? Or indeed, to dine in restaurants after a pandemic kills hundreds of thousands of people in the span of a few cruel months? In 1974, the sociologist Jib Fowles coined the term chronocentrism, the belief that one's own times are paramount and that other periods pale in comparison. The past few weeks have, understandably, confronted us with an especially loud chorus of chronocentric voices, claiming that we are on the cusp of unprecedented change. Academics, intellectuals, politicians, and entrepreneurs have made sweeping pronouncements about the transformations that the pandemic will spur. After surveying a number of prominent economists and historians, the New York Times declared that we are about to witness the end of the world economy as we know it. And yet other writers are claiming that our social lives will never go back to normal. Drawing from experiences in Wuhan, a psychologist has warned that some people may be so scarred by the pandemic that they will be too afraid to leave their homes. And others have predicted the end of hugs or the end of handshakes. The coronavirus pandemic is a tragedy of historic magnitude. It may well be remembered as the most significant global event since the fall of the Soviet Union. I do not mean in any way to downplay either that magnitude or the suffering that it will continue to cause for many years. But even so, let's avoid the temptation of chronocentrism. In the aftermath of this, as after so many other disasters, we will learn to thrive anew. So before reading that article by Yasha Mount, and I have to say I absolutely love the title of it, I Predict Your Predictions Are Wrong, I realize that I'm a bit of a contrarian, and when somebody says something, my automatic instinct is to look at the other side of it and say, wait, is that true? Does that make sense? But as soon as I read that, I thought, oh, now here's a perspective I'd like to know something about. And I'm glad I did, because I had never heard the term chronocentrism prior to now. The fact that it was coined in 1974 just made me wonder, like, how have we not talked about this? How have I never heard about this? Because I recognize in that word something that we do all the time. We are constantly making the mistake of thinking that our time and our circumstances are so unique in the realm of human history that nothing can possibly ever be the same afterward. People have that sense of, my goodness, this new technology will change everything about how we communicate and everything will be better afterward. We've thought that about the internet. We thought that about television. And I suspect that some of our people thought that about the printing press and the clay tablet into which cuneiform could be stamped. We are constantly thinking that we are in the most important moment ever. And perhaps for ourselves it is. But in the grand scheme of things, it often is not. Now, we're very fortunate to have religious and spiritual practices because these are things that try to remind us of the value of the present moment, right? They ask us to exist in the here and now. And individually, that is so important because individually, we're really good at existing a little ways into the future or some ways into the past. In any given moment, we might be thinking about what we're making for dinner tonight, or what we need to do for work next week, or who we're going to be planning to visit as soon as we can visit somebody, or what life was like just a few months ago, or what we really wish we were doing right now. For all that we individually need to be brought back into this moment to understand what's happening right now, as human beings, we actually really do live in our own time. We are, as a species, selfish. We are self-centered. And actually, that's really useful overall. It helps us attend to the situations of the moment, to the threats and joys that are happening right now, to know whether we can relax or whether we have to stay vigilant. But sometimes this self-centeredness, this chronocentrism, results in our forgetting how to do better with and for one another and the world. Religion is something that we have created that helps us remember parts of the past that are worth hanging on to. It is a thing that says, wait, these stories matter. Let's tell them again. These ethics, we've learned them from past mistakes and past successes. Let's hold on to these values and bring them forward with us. Memorial Day, while not a religious holiday, maybe a civic religious holiday, is actually another tool to fight this chronocentrism. It's a way to remember that other people in other times dealt with terribly hard things. To remember the people who served and died as part of the military. And of course, that brings our minds to wars and other conflicts. In this moment, some people have started to encourage us to think of Memorial Day not just as a day to remember those who served and died in the military, but as a moment to remember all of those who have died in war, military and civilian alike. And other people are now asking that we include in our remembrance, at least during this pandemic crisis time, the people who have been serving on the front lines of this particular challenge, the medical folks and the custodians and the grocery workers everyone who is involved in food harvest and distribution, those people who are helping to keep us safe and alive and hopefully thriving through a really strange and difficult moment. They're asking that we remember that it's not just the military, especially in this moment, who are risking their lives and who are risking some deaths while the rest of us shelter in place. Regardless of how we choose to understand Memorial Day and how we, as humanity, as American humanity, will choose to shape this time and choose what to remember, how to use Memorial Day going forward. No matter how that works right now, honoring those who have died in service to this nation or to other people is a good and necessary thing to do. But beyond that, we also need to remember what will make a difference for us all going forward. Yes, the point of Memorial Day is to look backward in honor and memory. But the point of memory is to carry things forward and do better than we did before. We should be remembering what will help us prevent or minimize these sorts of terrible, hard things, and then do everything we can to put into place the structures and the systems and the stories that will help us do better in the future. This idea of chronocentrism says that we as a species won't remember well in a couple of decades what we should have learned now. And I bet if you think back over the course of your life, you can remember things where we thought in that moment, everything is going to change and we will learn, we will do this so much better than we did before. And we haven't. In a couple of decades, it is likely that we and those who are coming up behind us will not remember what would have prevented these deaths and this suffering from occurring. Young people just won't remember what elders knew. That's the way it is. I don't remember what happened when I was 5 nearly as well as I remember what happened when I was 25. Without intentional sharing, without the hard work of education and change and memory, we will lose what we should have preserved. Right? We know this in so many ways, all kinds of language. Those who don't remember their history are doomed to repeat it. There's a quote, apocryphal, probably not entirely true, but it kind of sums it up. We have fallen upon evil times. The world has waxed old and wicked. Politics are very corrupt. Children are no longer respectful to their elders. And everyone wants to be famous and write a book. This quote has been named again and again and again, and people keep trying to attribute it to the past. Even though it sounds so contemporary, people say, oh, it came from 5000 BC or 240 AD. But part of the reason this quote keeps being repeated, regardless of where it came from, is because we can recognize in it this self-centeredness, this belief that my time is worse than every other time, or more important than every other time. We don't need to be doomed to repeat our history if we remember it, if we keep telling the stories. So on this day, on this weekend, let us remember those who have died preserving freedom and safety, ending fascism, and let us remember those who have fought and died for reasons and causes that were not as noble, too often without realizing that that was true, or without an acceptable choice to make otherwise. But let us also remember and learn the lessons of those wars, how they began, how they were fought, how they ended, so that we might fight fewer of them in the future. And let us also remember in this moment what it is that we want to carry forward, Let us think carefully about what we will learn from this time and bring with us as we go forward. Will we only remember the fears that we have come to live with for this moment? The reasonable ones and the unreasonable ones? Will we come to believe that masks have magical properties and that gloves prevent us from needing to wash our hands? I really hope not. I really hope we remember that these are tools and that health is not dependent on magic, but rather on science and wisdom. Will we remember that government agencies like the CDC would have been better able to help us if science was more lifted up than politics? I really hope so. Will we remember the new ways that we have created connections, the new skills that we have learned, the ways that we've found to use technology, and the ways that we have found to adapt to possibilities? Maybe some of us will have chosen to remember that a slower pace is possible and healthy, worthwhile. I hope that we will remember that this time made clear our human responsibility for climate change and pollution, and our ability to diminish it by doing less of the things that cause the problems that are creating climate change, that are making it harder for people to breathe. In this time, I ask you what it is that you will remember. What is it that you will hang on to from this time? What will you carry forward? And then what will you teach? What will you help to make happen? What stories will you continue to tell so that we might do better? How will you help every moment be an important moment, but not fall into the trap of chronocentrism, losing the past in favor of only considering the present? It is good to be in the here and now. It is good for us to experience that. But as a species, we must remember. As cultures and communities, as institutions, we must create systems that help us do better, that help us protect one another and the world in which we live. So, what will you remember? Choose carefully, because it matters enormously what you choose to carry forward from here. Let us join together in speaking our unison benediction. It continues to be a little different than usual, hopefully only for a little while longer. But for now, stay home and engage with the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings. Thank you for being part of